From The Australian, here's what's on the front. I'm Claire Harvey. It's Thursday, March 20, 2025. Students enrolled in a Macquarie University law course were made to role-play as CEOs and poor children in an exercise designed to highlight their privilege. That revelation comes just days after The Australian reported the students risked failing the subject if they didn't perform a satisfactory acknowledgement of country. A free trade agreement between Australia and the European Union is a no-brainer, according to the EU's top diplomat. Gabriel Vicentin says Europe is a more reliable partner than the US, where President Donald Trump has slapped sweeping tariffs on Australian exports. Those stories are live right now at theaustralian.com.au. Another year, another Richest 250 list, and another billionaire breakup to keep things interesting. The Australian's annual roundup of the nation's wealthiest people is out on Friday. Today, who's in the top 10 and the return of James Packer. It's my favourite time of the year. The Australian's Richest 250 list is published on Friday, and editor John Stenzel joins us as he does every year. John, who's on top?
Gina Rinehart is on top. Now, I know no one's going to be too surprised by that. Now, she's worth $46 billion, which is a lot of money, and probably, again, there's not a massive surprise, but she's actually down a few billion from last year. So if you can say it's been a bad year when you've only lost a few $1 billion and still worth $46 billion, that's where Gina is.
The stock market's been going through a lot of volatility, as anyone who's made the mistake of checking their super balance knows. When you were putting this magazine together, we have to print it a little while before it's released. Did that make things a bit nerve-wracking?
Oh, it's always nerve-wracking that way. Like, you wonder whether there's people that are going to go out of business. Let's hope not. There's going to be people that might have health issues and all sorts of other things. The permutations of the stock market, look, some stocks are very volatile. The Teslas of the world are going up and down very quickly at the moment. Richard White at WiseTech, lost a few $1 billion in a day just before I went to the printers. So I had to change it, but people like that are still doing very, very well. In percentage terms, perhaps, maybe they're off a little bit, but in money terms, they're still big, big numbers.
I know the billionaires watch this list very closely. In your experience, are they worried about dropping a few billion here or there, or are they pretty relaxed?
No, they're worried about it. They really are. They see it as some sort of a scorecard of their success in business, I think, success in life. Their business is very, closely connected to who they think they are, their sense of being. I've already had a few text messages from people this week in the lead up to the release on Friday. What number am I on the list? How did I go? Where am I? There's a lot of fascination with that. And the ones that say that they don't read it, I know that they're reading it straight away because I usually hear if I've done anything wrong with their entries or there's any issues with the numbers. So I've got it down to what I hope is a pretty fine art in terms of checking information, or at least they know that I'm available in case there's any issues.
These people have got a lot of cash to throw around. You could potentially be making a bit on the side here, John, moving someone up and down the list a bit.
Well, Claire, there is a lot of journalistic ethics still involved in this list, despite the appearances. I mean, I know that you think that I just hang out on super yachts and private jets all the time, but most of the time I'm actually just at my desk beavering away at this list. But look, I don't indulge too much, particularly when it's time to put the list together.
So I can't be on the list next year then?
No, but I probably could sort you out with a super yacht or a jet if you need.
Okay, who's in the top 10?
Look, you've got people like Harry Triguboff. He's still going strong, 93 years old. With Meriton, he's worth $31 billion. So, look, he's had a very good year. Property prices are going up. He's got so much property that he wants to build, but, he blames government red tape for not doing it or not being able to. Mike Cannon-Brookes, Scott Farquhar, the Atlassian co-founders, they're both worth about $29 billion. Now, Mike's just ahead of Scott. There's probably a couple of assets that are going, a bit better than others. They're both still down a lot of their shares. So they're making a lot of money during the year, taking that out in cash. They usually spend it on Sydney mansions, maybe a private jet here or there. But the Atlassian share price has done really well.
All right. Last opening bell of the week coming up, but we've got enough time for a mad dash. Atlassian shares are going to be up sharply.
Symbol team. I think that people look to enterprise software. And when you think about that, you think about Salesforce.
Anthony Pratt, $27 billion, still going strong with cardboard boxes, manufacturing over in the US. Growth is forever, he says, in America. That's where he's spending most of his time these days. He's got a green card now. Clive Palmer, about $26 billion. I'm not sure how much he's going to spend on the election this year, but it's going to be a lot.
Gold Coast businessman Clive Palmer is on an advertising splurge, the kind usually reserved for major brands and fast food companies.
Again, here's a guy that gets hundreds of millions of dollars in cash every year. He spends a little bit of it on elections. He reckons he only spends, maybe 10 or 12% of what he makes. Nothing wrong with that, according to him. I think after that, there's probably a couple of interesting ones that listeners will really focus on. Nicola Forrest and Andrew Forrest. So,
now, just to remind everyone, in last year's episode of The Richest 250, we talked about how Andrew and Nicola Forrest had recently split up and that you'd had to make the call to split their fortunes when you were ranking them on the list. So how have you handled that this year?
Yes, there's been a lot of background checking and a lot of conjecture with this. So it turns out that Nicola actually owns, in her own name, a parcel of shares in Fortescue, which is the mining giant that Andrew founded and has grown into this huge, amazing iron ore mining business. He's also into green energy these days as well. The jury's still out on that.
The most celebrated advocate for the Albanese government's green hydrogen plan forced to slam on the brakes and back off a prized target. The iron ore billionaire announcing 700 redundancies and a slowdown in developing green hydrogen.
It's a massive business. They have a lot of joint shareholdings in a whole bunch of investments, including Fortescue. There's Fortescue, there's Tatarang, there's private empire, there's the philanthropy. All of that is together. But Nicola actually owns about 50 million shares in Fortescue by herself. And that adds up to her being worth about $1 billion more on paper than Andrew.
I'm sure she's being very mature about that and not gloating at all.
No, but I think she's made it pretty clear to me and to others that she wants to be ranked on a list like this in her own right these days.
Good for her.
We've still got Richard White, WiseTech. He's been a man who's generated a few headlines this year. A lot of controversy, a few sex scandals are there along the way.
Earlier this week, it emerged that WiseTech founder and CEO, billionaire Richard White, had bought expensive houses for women he was having affairs with and paying them big salaries. The share price fell another 6.5%, taking the total loss of value to more than $8 billion in a week. And tonight, Richard White resigned.
He's the gift that keeps on giving to journalists.
Absolutely. And he's actually issued a little bit of a mea culpa saying that, yes, there were maybe a couple of issues, but I'm committed to WiseTech. This is the software firm that he founded. He's back in charge there. He's worth almost $15 billion, $14.9 billion. That's about $5 billion more than last year. So, even in a bad year, so to speak, off the field, if you want to call it that, he's made a lot of money on it.
Yeah, and that's even despite there being not just, really off-field turmoil about his love life, but turmoil within that company itself for people leaving the board, some ructions about what his role would actually be. How do you think he's feeling about the future?
I think he's feeling pretty good because he's back in charge. So he's seen off a lot of the corporate governance issues in his head that shouldn't apply to him or that are unfair to his reputation. So 4 directors quit in February from the board. They weren't impressed with what was happening with an internal review into his behaviour or other corporate governance issues into the company. He's issued a little bit of a mea culpa, as I said, this week, and has said, look, I am committed to the future of WiseTech. He is firmly back in charge and he thinks he should be the one to drive that company into the future.
We'll have to wait until Friday to read the full list, but can you tell us who Richard has pushed out of the top 10?
Yeah, well, actually, Kerry Stokes. And Kerry Stokes hasn't had a bad year. The Seven West Media boss he's probably well known as, but Seven Group Holdings is the company that he has. And that's a lot of mining equipment and other resources investments. He's had a really good year. He's put on a couple of $1 billion to his wealth, but Richard's just overtaken him. And the Canva co-founders have had this great year as well.
Okay, let's talk about Mike and Annie Cannon-Brookes because they are the big split of this year.
Aussie tech billionaire Mike Cannon-Brookes is reportedly splitting from his wife after 13 years of marriage. It comes just a week after news of the country's richest couple, Andrew Twiggy Forrest and his wife Nicola, were also calling it quits.
What's going on in terms of their wealth?
There will come a time where they'll have to split that as well, I suspect. That's what happens. There's a whole bunch of disputes that are going on around a lot of people on the list at the moment. It's the same with Annie and Mike Cannon-Brookes. At the moment, it's in Mike's name. The assets are mostly in his name. There's going to come a time where, depending on what happens, she will emerge with a whole big bunch of, assets. She'll clearly be a billionaire, the way that the attraction's going with what his wealth is. But I wonder whether she will end up with a big shareholding in Atlassian in her name too. So watch this space.
The First Wives Club.
Exactly right.
Coming up, James Packer comes home. Okay, now one of Australia's most famous wealthy families, probably the most beloved or at least the most well-known, is the Packers. James Packer doesn't live in Australia anymore, but he clearly still has a fondness for Australian investments and Australian business. He cares. What's happening in his life?
There's a few themes that have come out since James sold out of Crown Casino a few years ago for about $3 billion. He's going into technology investments in America. He's been a big investor in NVIDIA and also Taiwan, semiconductor company. So he's sort of seeing the future with computer chips and AI, a couple of other technology investments. He's also investing in companies of people that he used to know through Crown that are building apartments and other property projects here in Australia. It's quite a change for him. He's also back in the movie industry as well. Rat Pack, which was the name that he was associated with. It's probably a decade ago now that he sunk a lot of money into. Let's face it, he lost a lot of money into it. He's back in that with his business partner, Brett Ratner. They've put the money behind the movie of Melania Trump.
She's largely treated as an ornament.
To Donald, she's a trophy wife. But I think to Melania herself, no.
I absolutely think that fashion is used as a political weapon.
So that's on Amazon and it's been doing very well and I think it's going to be extremely profitable. So he's back. He said he's had the best year he's had for quite a while. I think he means that in money terms. He looks pretty happy as well. So you just never know with James. He's had his ups and downs over the years, but he seems to be in a pretty good space at the moment.
He's obviously someone who's capable of looking over the horizon. Do you sense some strategy behind financing a movie about the president's wife?
He's turned up at Mar-a-Lago, as we all have, haven't we, Claire? I mean, I've been there myself, and it's a whole other story for another time. But yeah, it's brought him into the orbit of, I suppose, of the all-powerful Trump family at the moment. As to how much he exploits that for business terms, it remains to be seen. He doesn't have an operating business these days that could be not necessarily used or could benefit from Trump policies. But, look, if you keep yourself pretty close to power, things tend to happen.
At Trump's inauguration, the tech billionaires were lined up behind him, looking like they were fully on board with the restoration of Donald. What do you sense from the Australian billionaires? Are they watching what's coming out of the White House warily? Are they excited about this new generation?
I think it's a bit of a mixed bag at the moment. I think they're keeping pretty quiet at the moment, given a lot of them had green credentials or some pretty progressive hiring policies and that sort of thing. I think at the end of the day, though, you can start to see that they're increasingly all about, what's best for their company. If they can see that they need to pivot a certain way to keep their fortunes or to make even more money, I really think that they will. These guys, and they're mostly guys, except for people like Melanie Perkins and Robin Denham, who's, by the way, the chair of Tesla with Elon Musk, was one of the people that she's supposedly in charge of. I think they're pretty pragmatic is the word I'm looking for. So they will sniff the breeze pretty quickly when it comes to policy in Australia or in America where they are operating a lot of their businesses.
John Stenzolt is the editor of The List, Australia's Richest 250. You can hear John on our sister podcast, The Money Puzzle, with our wealth editor, James Kirby, talking about the volatile fortunes of those tech billionaires. The full list is out on Friday. You can check it out and read all the features and analysis at theaustralian.com.au.